The big question. What is the difference between gold and fool's gold? Who's hiding what? Let's all spread out, Dr. Forrester suggested as they reached the stretch of the gully below the dig site. Keep your eyes peeled for anything that looks like the small fossil bones we found yesterday. Everyone fanned out across the width of the gully and with heads bowed began scanning the rocky ground. Daria picked up something, frowned, and dropped it again. Then she prodded the rocky soil with the tip of her finger. "Wow, everything is sure drying out quickly," she said. "What happened to all that rainwater?" "Some of it soaked into the ground," Tess replied, "but some of it evaporated and changed to water vapor that has mixed with the air. Remember, though, that physical changes are reversible. High above the Earth's surface, the air is much colder. When water vapor encounters cold air, it loses heat and condenses. It changes states from a gas back to a liquid, forming tiny droplets of liquid water. Those tiny droplets in the air form clouds. If the droplets are big enough, they'll fall back to Earth as rain." "You mean we might get another thunderstorm?" Crystal eyed the sky warily. "It's possible, but I'm guessing it won't rain again for quite a while," Tess replied. "I think the excitement is over for today." Just then, Julian let out a shout. "Don't be so sure, because I just found gold! Eureka!" Everyone rushed over to see the gleaming, dark yellow rock that Julian held in the palm of his hand. "I'm not only going to be famous," Julian said triumphantly, "I'm going to be rich. Just look at the size of that nugget. My dad is going to be so proud of me." Dr. Forrester examined Julian's find carefully. "Sorry to disappoint you, Julian. I'm afraid what you have there isn't gold, but a very common type of rock called iron pyrite." Julian's face fell. "You're absolutely sure?" Tess laid a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're not the first person to make that mistake, Julian. In fact, iron pyrite is often called fool's gold for that very reason." Amy could tell Julian was very disappointed that his great discovery turned out to be nothing. He didn't say anything as he took the rock back from Tess and shoved it deep into his pocket. A few minutes later, Matt stopped and nudged something with the toe of his shoe. "Hey, what about these?" Everyone rushed over and watched as Dr. Forrester knelt down and then picked 3 more fossils out of the gravel. "Maybe these will help me figure out just what kind of animal we have," she said excitedly. "Can we get back to the dig site now?" Julian blurted out in a loud, impatient voice. It was clear he didn't want to look for small fossils anymore. "It is almost noon," Tess acknowledged, "so let's break for lunch." They climbed up the slope to the dig site and retreated to the far end of the plateau again to eat sandwiches and fruit. Amy made a point of sitting next to Crystal. She unwrapped her sandwich, but then laid it aside as she leaned in to ask the question she'd wanted to ask all morning. "Why haven't you shown Dr. Forrester your drawings of the little fossils yet?" Amy whispered. "If you did, she'd know there really is one missing." Crystal's eyes went wide with surprise. "How did you know about my drawings?" "I admit I peeked at your sketchbook," Amy confessed. "But you can't keep this information quiet. You need to let Dr. Forrester know." Crystal was silent for a while. "Okay, I promise I will, but only if there's no one else around. Otherwise, people will make fun of my drawings." "No, they won't," Amy gasped. "You draw really well." Crystal suddenly looked past Amy with a surprised look on her face. "Hey, your sandwich!" Amy turned just in time to see a small animal with narrow stripes making off with part of her sandwich. You little stinker, she said, laughing as the animal disappeared into a crack in the rocks far above them. Those little ground squirrels are all over these Badlands, said Tess, chuckling. They're very good at stealing food. I've known them to make off with other small objects they think might be food, too. After lunch, they returned to excavating Achy Breaky's bones. Matt had already exposed 3 of the dinosaur's fossil teeth. Amy was making much slower progress because her mind kept wandering back to the missing fossil bone. We're never going to get this jawbone excavated if you keep staring off into space, Matt said quietly, glancing up at his sister. I know, Amy said hurriedly, picking up her brush to sweep away the bits of rock dust she'd created. But I can't stop thinking about that missing bone. She told him about Crystal's drawings. Maybe Dr. Forrester simply mislaid it, Matt suggested, like Dad does with his car keys all the time. There's no evidence someone took it, and why would they? Amy had to admit that Matt's question was a good one. She glanced around at the group. Everyone was hard at work, except Felix, who just at that moment took something out of his pocket and popped it into his mouth. Felix noticed Amy staring and swallowed hard, gulping down whatever it was. He cleared his throat and suddenly turned to Tess. I was wondering, Tess, just what is the difference between gold and fool's gold? Amy thought Felix just asked the question to turn her attention away from him. Tess didn't notice, though, and was happy to answer it. Remember that atoms are the smallest particles of matter. The thing is, you don't find many atoms all by themselves in nature. Atoms typically join together or bond into groups of 2 or more to form molecules. Some molecules are made up of atoms of just a single element. A lump of gold, for example, would be made up of many gold atoms bonded together. Most molecules, though, are combinations of 2 or more different elements. A molecule of iron pyrite, for example, has 2 atoms of the element sulfur bonded to an atom of the element iron. Molecules that contain atoms of 2 or more different elements are called compounds. Water is another example of a compound. A water molecule is made up of 2 atoms of the element hydrogen and 1 atom of the element oxygen. Is that why people sometimes call water H2O? Daria asked. Precisely, Tess replied. There are millions of molecules that are compounds, and you can find them everywhere and in everything. This sandstone rock we're scratching away is made of molecules that are compounds. So are these dinosaur fossils and the tools we're using. Each one of you is a walking, talking collection of different compounds that make up your bones, muscles, nerves, and everything else in your bodies. Dr. Forrester suddenly spoke up. Okay, here's a riddle. Why are all compounds molecules, but all molecules are not compounds? Because some molecules are made up of atoms of only one element, Matt exclaimed proudly. Exactly right, Dr. Forrester said. Tess was about to continue her chemistry lesson when Daria pointed at something off in the distance. Sorry to interrupt, but I think someone's coming. Far off in the distance, a black SUV was slowly approaching, bumping along on a barely visible track that wound among the ridges. I thought no one lived out here, Amy said. No one does, Dr. Forrester replied, but maybe these people are lost. She dug a pair of binoculars out of her backpack and trained them on the distant vehicle. As they all watched, the vehicle stopped, then quickly turned around and headed back in the direction from which it had come. That was strange, Julian said. It's like they suddenly saw us and turned around. Amy thought it was strange, too. What was even stranger, though, was the look Dr. Forrester and Tess exchanged as the black SUV drove away. Nothing else disturbed their work for the rest of the day, and Dr. Forrester was very pleased with their progress. As the sun started to sink in the western sky, they packed up their gear and said goodbye to Achy Breaky for another day. Back at camp, Tess grilled hamburgers over the open campfire and heated baked beans in a cast-iron pot. After dinner, Dr. Forrester put them all to work in the lab, helping her measure the little fossils from the gully and use the balance to determine their mass. Amy kept giving Crystal encouraging looks, hoping she would show Dr. Forrester her sketches, but Crystal just kept shaking her head. "Can you tell what kind of animal it was yet?" Julian asked as they were putting all the instruments away. "Well, this is part of a leg bone," Dr. Forrester said, pointing at one of the fossils. "And this one looks to be part of a vertebra or a piece of the backbone. But I'm still not sure what we have. It's never a good idea to jump to conclusions." And then it was time for bed. Amy caught up to Crystal as she was heading to the tent. I know, Crystal whispered. "I promise I'll show my sketches to Dr. Forrester tomorrow. I need to get my courage up." Crystal fell asleep within minutes, but Amy decided to read until Daria came in. She finished one chapter and then another, but Daria still hadn't come. Amy peered out through the tent flap and looked around at the silent camp. Everyone else was asleep as nearly as she could tell. Amy sat on her cot and began to worry. What if something had happened to Daria? What if she'd been bitten by a snake? Just as Amy was about to tug on her sweatshirt and shoes and go in search of her, Daria came bouncing into the tent with a huge smile on her face. "Where have you been?" Amy hissed. "I was starting to worry." I went for a long walk," Daria whispered back, sounding strangely excited. "In the dark?" Amy asked. I used the flashlight on my phone," Daria said quickly. "Good night." She spun on her heel and headed for her cot. Amy lay awake thinking about Daria's strange behavior, Felix's secretive snacking, and the odd look Tess and Dr. Forrester exchanged when the black SUV appeared. Perhaps they were clues to the missing fossil. She pulled out her notebook and by the light of her flashlight listed them one by one. No matter how many times she read through the list, however, she couldn't make sense of any of them, and finally decided, like Dr. Forrester had with the small fossils, that there wasn't enough evidence to draw any conclusions. But from now on, she was going to keep a closer eye on Daria and Felix.